All right, let's get started. So, hello everybody. Welcome to State and Props. Give me a quick visual check. Who didn't go to the morning session on State and Props? Two of you. Cool. The three of you. So, and then everybody else is here for another round through this. Cool. So, neat. That'll be fun. Let's, with that in mind, I hope that by the end of this lesson, you will be able to, let's see, I'll do it this way. Differentiate between state and props. And I hope you will be able to identify use cases for...
You aren't sharing your screen.
Oh, I'm not! And I identify use cases for state and props too. So this will be a lot of talking, but hopefully it'll be conversation. Probably we'll do a little bit of coding, probably not very much. So let's talk about state and props. Who can give me a shot at a distinction between these two things? What's state? What's props?
A state is the way something is at a given period in time, and props are like it's short for properties, and it's like it defines the framework of the different types of states you could have.
Interesting idea. I kind of like your state definition. I like about 70% of it. Not so sure on that props though. What else can we add to that? Let's flesh this out.
The attributes on like the HTML looking kind of stuff are your props.
Not so much. What else?
Props is like data, right? It's kind of like then the data down, actions up. So like an array of indices is being data.
So now, which one was that?
For props.
Okay, so we think props are data. So what's state then? Is state data?
State is the data too, but I think state and pop is different. If you want your components to be changing, you can use the state, the class component. But if you want to passing something down from the state component, you're using props.
Cool. I like Alice's answer. So they're both data. We'll say that state that's mine. Props is someone else's. So Alice used the phrase pass down. We often say that with props. We're passing down props. So if I'm describing something about me, that's state. If I'm describing something that I was given, that's props. Give me more. How else can I flesh this out? Distinguish between state and props.
Maybe it's just that like state is like the current state of your application. So like if your application is like showing movie titles and it has like the index page and showing all the movie titles, and then you would search for another movie title. The state of the index is the first one, and then when it changes to the other one, then that's a different state. That like the way to think about state, and then props being that what like the user is passing into it. So like the props is like I'm looking for this movie. and that would be like the prop.
Interesting. So I like some parts of that too. We're talking about the state of the application. What's different about applications versus components? They're talking about the state of the application. What about a state of a component? And if those can both have state, how are they different?
The application being the whole application and a component being a component of the application. So like a component could be like the search bar or a show page. I mean, it could be a lot of things, I think.
So, yes, can be. Really, they're just sort of like levels of like a fractal. So if we say that the application is this, and the application contains these components, each of which can contain components, each of which can contain components. That's sort of what we're looking at in all component-based architecture. This is how React works. It's also how Vue works. It's also Ember works. It's also Angular works. This is component-based architecture. The app is a component, and it's made up of components, and all of them kind of look the same.
Can I ask how that differentiates between object-oriented languages? Is it like because we're in a framework and it's a component-based framework using an object-oriented language?
So it's not using an object-oriented language, it's using JavaScript. JavaScript is not an object-oriented language.
That's right. Sorry, I don't know why I always think that. But there is an object in JavaScript, but JavaScript is not an object-oriented language. Sorry.
JavaScript is an object-capable language. It can do a lot of OO-style things, but it can also do a lot of FP-style things. So it's really hard to say it's particularly pure about either one. JavaScript doesn't have classes, like in the traditional sense. It has things that kind of look like classes, and they work about 80% of the same way. It also isn't really a functional language. It has variables and if statements and for loops and all kinds of stuff that isn't in functional languages. But it does have lambdas, and it does have applicatives, and it does have a lot of things that you would expect in a functional language. It's one of the reasons I like it so much. You can just kind of pinch and borrow from each one. But JS is not fundamentally an OOP language. So, and all of the front-end frameworks are JavaScript. So there you go. Any other questions at this point? This idea that our application is a component and it's made up of smaller components, but they're all kind of the same thing.
Is this also called a hierarchy?
Yep. We are looking at a hierarchy of components.
Okay.
Cool. So if I was going to try to put state on this, I don't know why this works so badly. There we go. If I was going to try to put state and props somewhere in this little chart here. State, like this thing might have some state. This thing might have some state. This thing might have some state. So if we step back a sec, state is variables, properties, these kinds of things. So we flash back to mod 1. The state of an object is whatever values its properties currently have. That's it. That's state in OOP. When we started working with variables and stuff, okay, what is currently saved in the variables? We say that's the state. And if the value of a variable changes, we say that we've changed the state. If we're using a metaphor, traffic light can only be showing red, yellow, or green. Which one it is currently showing, that's its state. You could also say something like, how long has it been showing it? Maybe that's part of the state also, because it goes green for a minute, and then, so how far we are through that minute, maybe that's also state. And then now the state is, it is yellow, and it has been yellow for 3 seconds. Maybe that's the state of the traffic light also. If I have, to bring it back to HTML, if I have an input field, maybe that's a component. And I go, okay, so what is the state of this? Oh, there's nothing in it. Okay. What if I start writing characters in it? All right, well now its state is that it has the string hi in it. I have changed the state of that input field. If I type, if I delete, all of those things are changing the state. Another thing I can do with state on an input field, is it having an error or not? Have you ever tried submitting a form where the validation doesn't passes, like the border turns red or something like that? You could say that's the state of that input field. When we talk about state, that's what we mean. Ask me some questions about that.
I like the traffic light analogy.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say then that like the controller, I'm talking about like of the traffic light, that's some sort of controller, right?
Mm-hmm.
That passes in functions or commands to it. So like when it passes in a function, tell it to change from like green to yellow. Would that be it sending props to that component?
Yes.
That is the traffic light.
That's exactly what that is. AJ, I think you found the beat. So let's explore AJ's. Let's see if there's more questions, but I do want to talk about that more. Yes. So if I have this traffic light, I'll pick a different color. So that's the traffic light. And then what we were just talking about is like, all right, well, this can have different states and shit in it. However, in real life, that's not actually what's happening there. What's really happening is there's this box that sits over kind of next to the road. And that's really like the thing that has different states. It's just telling the light what color it should show. There aren't a whole bunch of complicated electronics inside of a traffic light. All that stuff's on the box by the side of the road. So we say that that's over here. So we could say that the state of this is green, and we could say that it has been green for 9 seconds. That's the state of the traffic controller.
Would properties be like the property is color and the property is how long it's been green for?
They're objects, so it's key value.
Okay, so properties is not like the key in that circumstance.
Nope. It'd be like color, green, time, 9 seconds kind of thing.
Okay.
So let's say this is the state of the traffic controller, but I need to get it to the traffic light. So I pass the color as a prop. And so now that traffic light, that doesn't need to keep track of what color it should be. Something else tells it. It doesn't have any state of its own. All it does is gets told a color, and that's it. Which leads us to another takeaway that I want you to have about state and props. This is important. Props are someone else's state 99% of the time. If it's props to one component, it's probably the state of a component above it in the hierarchy.
Will you say that one more time about the props?
Yep. Props are someone else's state.
Thank you.
So this app can have some state that I pass down as a prop to this component. That component can just keep on passing that one down. And so now that inner component, it's got its own state. It also took in some props that were somebody else's state.
Does that kind of go along with when you are setting up your class and you say constructor, and inside of constructor you say super, and you pass props to both of those things?
Kind of. So what you're doing there is you're like enabling props for that component. It's not necessarily doing anything with them, but yeah.
Okay.
Ask me more questions about what state and props are.
Are props like arguments?
Yes, they're very much like arguments. Because yeah, they came from somewhere else. It's the thing that called the function that had to figure out how to get all this shit. The function just took it in. It's just a given. Props work the same way.
So in this case, assuming that the traffic light doesn't do anything else other than take the state from the traffic control box or whatever, would that make it stateless, even though it's still changing color depending on the state of the control box?
Yes, that makes it stateless. In this metaphor, the traffic controller is stateful, the traffic light is stateless. Because the traffic light doesn't keep track of its own state.
So whether or not it's stateful or stateless is literally whether or not it's tracking its own state.
Correct.
Not whether or not it has a different state.
Correct.
Trippy.
Could you also say that the traffic controller is a class and that the traffic light is a function?
That would work that way, yes. Like, the reason I'm hedging that a little bit is you could make the traffic light a class if you wanted to. There's no good reason to. There's not a ton of benefit to that, but you could. And with hooks, we can do all of this with functions. But if you want another simple, like day 2 heuristic that'll work pretty well, if it has state, it needs to be a class. If it doesn't have state, it can be a function. And it's pretty common to go back and forth, like frequently, like minute to minute, which one a function is, or which one a component is.
Okay.
So you're saying like a function could just be a component of the app, like, I don't know, function count to 10. Would that be considered a component?
No, what I'm saying is that you can represent components in React with either classes or functions. The choice of when to use one or the other is, does it need state? Cool, it's a class, end of story. Does it not need state? Cool, it's a function, end of story. But there's
And hooks are a way to like put state inside of a function, right?
Kinda, but like not in a React sense.
Okay.
You can
And that
save
goes back to
variables and stuff, but that's not the same thing as React state.
Okay.
You said if it's state, it has to be a class?
Correct. Class is the only thing that can have state without using, like the asterisk on that is without using hooks.
So does React primarily follow this OOP paradigm because of that? Because class is the thing that tracks state, and state is the thing that makes React React?
No, in fact, every other part of React is super duper functional. And it was considered by many, myself included, a complete fucking mistake to put classes in React at all. And that was pretty much the entire design goal of hooks, was to get rid of classes.
Huh. So then not even using state is your preferred way to use React?
No, you have to use state somehow. Hooks are an alternative to that.
Okay.
They solve the same problem. Let's see what this would look like in code. Create React app traffic light. Okay, so I run create React app for this traffic light app. So I do this with all of the frameworks. One of the first things that I do when I scaffold out a new app like this is delete a ton of shit. You don't have to, but I think it makes it easier to read and talk about. So I go into our traffic light app. And I just go hog wild. App.css, more like nope. App.js, no thank you logo. No thank you all of this. Put something in here to make sure that like it still works. This is running slow. That's actually, I'll just delete that. Index.css, how about nope? Index.js, no service worker, no index.css, no any of this shit, no service worker, no logo, no service worker, no tests. Neat. And we can get rid of this. And actually, come to think of it, we can get rid of this too. All right, that is a bare bones React app. This thing, which like starts the app, and this is our top level component. That's all you need. And so I will npm start. No, we're on 3001. Do I see traffic light? Running this, the drawing app, OBS, and Zoom at the same time is like turning my computer into lava. But all right, we got traffic light showing up. So take a look at this component. So let's say we have a traffic controller and we have a traffic light. So I'm gonna make components for those. So I'll touch traffic controller.js and I'll touch traffic light.js. So traffic controller This one's going to have state, so it needs to be a class. I'm going to import React and component from React. I'm going to export default class traffic controller. I'm going to extend react.component.
Can I ask a quick question again?
Yeah.
What's the difference between putting export default up top versus on the bottom? Is it like declaring
Doesn't matter.
The name like specifically, or is it something have to do with like a name?
Nope, it's just saving space. So doing that, and then doing those are identical. It's like in a function, if you did const a equals 2, return a, or you just did return 2, same difference.
Thank you.
Cool, so we have this. And I know that the labs show you, you're supposed to do something like this. And then call super with props at the start. And then you do your state, like this dot state stuff in here. You don't need to do any of that. You can like make it through the rest of this program without ever using a constructor. Spoiler alert. What you do instead is you just use state equals like this. What's up, buddy?
Can you give this to Mama?
Yeah, I can. You want to say hi to my students? Come here. Hey, everybody. This is my son, Duncan. Hey!
It's a washcloth.
It's a washcloth? Very cool. He just crocheted this.
What?
Wow.
Yeah.
How old is he?
7.
7, nice.
Yeah. All right, so we can say something like current color equals, or current color is, and it starts at red. Cool, now we have a stateful component. Ta-da, that's it. Pretty cool. We could make a render method, and we can say something like render. Cool. All right, I've got a stateful component here. And I can bring that in over here. You can say import traffic controller from traffic controller. And then over here, oops, that's not how that works. I can do something like that and make my traffic controller show up. Current color is red. Aye! So I have a stateful component and I'm showing that component's state. Questions about that?
You said you have a stateful component and you are showing that component's state?
That is what I said. Traffic controller is a stateful component, and its render method is also showing its state.
I see.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When you make the the state load is possible. This is what you're doing right now, and then you import to the app.js. That is not like passing the state up, right? It's a different thing.
No, that's a different thing.
Okay.
When we're talking about keeping state low, if you have two components or more components that are, where'd my drawing app go? All right, I think my drawing app crashed. If we have two components that are right next to each other, they can't talk. You can't talk to a sibling component, so you have to talk through your parent. So that means that parent needs to keep track of anything both of you need to know, and so you want that to be as low in the hierarchy as possible. That's what that means.
Okay, that just means the app.js and another component is the same level right now.
Well,
okay.
No, app.js owns traffic controller. If I made something like a second traffic controller, let's say one of them is for 15th Street and the other one is for 30th Street, they're at the same level, but they can't talk to each other. But both of them can talk to app, and app can talk to both of them.
Okay.
Ask me more questions about props and state.
Don't you want to hold state kind of at the top of your hierarchy so you can pass it down?
So, if you do this, eventually you end up with your top level component, like app, owning all of the state for the application, and you need to pass that all the way down through everything. And that gets messy. Now, like the Ember way to do this and the like Smart View way to do this would be to like have a page component for every page in your app and have that own all of the state for that page, or at least a lot of the state for that page. React people don't even like that. So keep that in mind. But yeah, the convenience that you get from keeping all of that state at the top level would be exactly like keeping all the variables for your entire app in the global space at the top of a file or something like that. You could do it, but it creates a lot more problems than it solves. Good question. What else? So let's do something that will change the state. Let's add a button in here. And whenever this button gets clicked, we want to change the state. Not to like anything in particular, just to something else. So say on click, I want to do I can make a method here called change color. And what this is going to do is new color will be well, let's see. Let's say let new color, and then I'm going to switch off of this.state.current color, and if it is red, new color is green. And if it's green, then new color is yellow. And if it's yellow, then new color is red. Something like this. And then I do a this dot set state. I set current color to new color. All right, why is this thing so mad at me? Expected a default case. I'll bet you would. Happy now? There we go. All right, so that function should just rotate to a different color. And I set it so that it'll do that every time I click that button. Let's see if it works. Current color is red, green, yellow, red. Dope. Last thing. All right. This is my traffic controller. But the traffic controller is also showing, like, you know, whatever the color is. That's really the traffic light's job. So I can go over to the traffic light. From So this one's stateless, so I'm going to make this one a function. This one's going to take in props, and it's going to return whatever the thing should be. So if I say, just move this over to here, and then instead of its state, it just does that off of props. Okay. And then over here, I can import my traffic light component. And then use it over here. And pass in my state. Neat. I wonder if it worked. Current color is red, green, yellow. Fucking sick. So the traffic controller owns a traffic light and keeps track of what state the thing should be and has the button that changes the state. The traffic light just gets that state as a prop. There's really nothing to this. It doesn't have state. It is a stateless component. It just gets told what to do.
So the color being passed to the traffic light, those are the props.
Yes. This.state.current color is part of traffic controller's state. As soon as it gets passed in here, it becomes traffic light's props. You can even name it something else. I changed it from current color to color. And then it just shows up as a regular parameter.
Cool.
You could even hard code that. So instead of something like that, I could say that, let's see, that the color is purple. You just give it a string. Current color is purple. But this is like the whole React thing, is that by having it in state here, as soon as current color changes, everything that depends on that, everywhere it's being passed as props, all of those components re-render with whatever their new props are.
That's cool.
That is cool. It's been like probably the most transformative thing in the web over the last 5 years. Ask me more questions.
Is that partly due to the computing power of processors, or like it does seem like a really big game changer, but I just don't understand why. I don't know if it's like a breakthrough, like in discovery of, I don't know. It seems like a big deal, but like no one cares. I don't know.
Oh no, everybody cares. It's completely changed like programming, really. The big thing that changed is people taking JavaScript seriously. So JavaScript was invented in 1995. It was developed over 10 days at Netscape by a guy named Brendan Eich. And it was like a very tiny amount of like programmable behavior in the browser. We're talking like changing your mouse cursor and like scroll effects and like little things like that. It wasn't supposed to be for programming. The thing that changed all that, like honestly, was Gmail. Gmail, like if you didn't use email before Gmail, the way that it used to work is you'd go to a website and it would like show you your mails. It looked very similar to how it looks now, but it wasn't this like you click on a message and then you're there. It was like a web page. You'd click on a message and then it would load a new web page. If you got a new email, you'd have to refresh your browser to see it. Like none of that stuff happened automatically. So Gmail was like, hey, we have this like lightweight programming language in the browser. I wonder how far we could push that. And they pushed it as far as like anyone could imagine and made an interactive application. They were like, you got a new email, it showed up in real time. If you clicked on a message, it didn't refresh the page, it just showed the message. This is like 2001 or so. Like there was nothing like that before. And I think everybody at the time went like, well, easy enough for Google to do that. How am I going to do that? And but then like that started getting people taking JavaScript more seriously. And then like give it a couple years, they bolt a few more things onto the language. jQuery gets really popular, which solves a lot of problems and like really added a lot of features to JavaScript that like we still use. And then, all right, cool. So we can do more things in the browser a lot easier, but certainly like not all the real stuff is still happening on the back end. And so this kind of coincided with the rise of Rails and PHP as a language. We're still doing all the heavy lifting on the back end, but we're doing some cool smoke and mirrors stuff on the front end. And about 5 years ago is when that just completely flipped. And we go, I think all we really need the back end for is like some lightweight database access. Really, we could do all the like architecture shit on the front end with JavaScript. And all the old timers went, why would you do such a thing? And here we are. Because like taking all of the, making that whole thing asynchronous, doing all that processing power on the client makes things feel like native apps, even though they're just running in your browser. And the front end frameworks, Angular was really kind of the first one out of the gate. Ember was really popular shortly after that. There were like probably a dozen other ones that were like kind of vying at the time, like Meteor and Knockout and Backbone and like some of these things. Most of those died off. React was like the last one to the party, but they had this idea that data should only flow in one direction, and it turns out they were super right about that. And every other framework, like, literally refactored their code to do that over the matter of like a couple months. And now this is just how we make apps. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. Cool. Ask me more questions about state and props.
What if you wanted to change the actual color of the text? How do you incorporate styling?
Sure. We can do that with JSX. So we can say, let's see, this would be style, and then we want the style to be color is, actually, can I do that in there? Maybe. What if I did this? Style is all right, let's see if that works. Yeet. Oh, cool. Got it. So it just wants an object. That's easier. Oh, it also needs to be an object inside the JSX curlies.
So
there we go.
That seems like a pain in the ass. Should we do it that way, or should we do it separately in a style sheet?
How many of these like kinds of changes, A, do you want to do inline, and B, are like the direct result of an action like this? So like the thing that I'm doing is wildly uncommon. And like, to your point, what you'd really probably do is toggle different classes for that based on some state, and those classes would have the actual style changes that you want. But there you go.
Cool.
Ask me more questions about state and props. What's up?
Well, it's not. I don't know if it's directly about state and props, but I'm still not. I don't understand what's going on functionally with the export default and the export component on the other JS file. Can you do that one more time?
Yep, absolutely. So if you had to share JavaScript between two different files, how do you do that?
You would have to import them, connect them. I don't know what the right word is.
We'll leave the import export stuff out for right now. It's mod 3. You're doing your mod 3 project. You have more than one file's worth of JavaScript that you want to use. How do you do it?
I would, I think I would use like a source link in the HTML file.
Yep.
Use multiple source scripts, basically.
Yep. That's exactly what you would do. It's really the only way to do that. You just script source every single one of the JavaScript files that you want to use. Now, what's kind of interesting about that is when you script source something, it's basically like you copy and pasted whatever was in that code directly into the HTML. So that means you could do something like declare a variable in one script and then use it in the next one. Can anybody see what the problem with that might be?
If there's redundancy
Sure.
in naming?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You could clobber and overwrite and accidentally misuse all kinds of shit. Now it's also order dependent. If you change the order of those script imports, who knows what might break. That's all we had for years and years and years. So what we get with import-export is a way to treat these as modules. We can say, in this file, I have this module. Nobody else can see its variables, its scope. It can't change anything in it other than what I specifically make available as a module. So if I did this like the smallest way I could, it would be something like I have this really cool math file. It's got all my great math hits in it. So it's got sum. And it returns A plus B. It's got product. That's one of my favorites. And this returns A times B. All right, so we got a few utility functions in here. What I could do is now I can export those. I can say export default sum, and now in some other file, I can import, I can even call it something different. I call it adding stuff from wherever this file is. I'm going to take the product one out for right now. Oh, thanks, JavaScript, for helping me. It's not real code. Leave me alone. Oops, that's not what I want to do either. So this is another way to put JavaScript in one file and use it in another file.
So what is default on line 3?
Sure. So this is why I'm able to rename it, call it adding stuff, whatever else. Let's say I put that product one back in. I can also export, oh God, I saved it again, shit. I can also export that one separately. So I can say, I think it's this. I always have to look up the syntax on this. Named exports JS. Okay, yeah, you just say the name of it. So I could also do this, and I could say something like, I want to import that, and I also want to import that slick product function, and now I can use that one too. So a module can have a default export, whatever. Most modules have like one thing that you actually want out of it. So cool, let's just call that the default export. In the case of React, it's the entire React library. If you're using React, that's what you want most of the time. So cool, that's the default export. Or our component files. There's only one component in the file. What else would I be exporting? So whatever, it's the default. But if I did have a bunch of components in the file, if I did have a whole bunch of functions that I wanted to export, you can do them as named exports, and you import those that way. By the way, that looks like destructuring, which I know that a lot of you just found out what that was yesterday, if you've heard of it at all. But it is not. It's a completely separate thing that uses the same syntax. Named exports, that feature is called. So if we go back to React, I'm taking in React's default export, and I also am taking in their name component export so that I can use them in the app. This line here in Rails, that would be class traffic controller. It's inheritance. Just a different
Line
syntax.
under it or above it? I know like
Sorry. Those
import is inheritance and export is like
No, extends is inheritance.
extends is inheritance.
That word right there, that's inheritance. It's the same as less than in Ruby was.
Okay.
Sometimes, I think in some of the labs, they do it this way, which is also valid, but a little bit noisier. You could just take the default export from React and then extend react.component. Same thing.
So just to confirm, React in this scenario on line 1 is a separate JavaScript file that is the React library, right?
Correct.
Okay, cool. So that makes sense. And then when we specify on line 1 to grab the component package, or I don't know what to call that, but is that just like a snippet of code within the React library, or is that in a separate file as another class of its own?
You mean the traffic light?
Oh no, well, yeah. In either case, I was referring to the React component,
Okay.
where we're inheriting.
So there's two slightly different syntaxes here. You'll notice that this one starts with a dot and this one doesn't. That's not an accident. So this is exactly the same as writing import React from whatever the root of this project is, node modules /react /index.js. Those two things are the same.
Oh, okay.
So when you import, when you install an NPM module and you want to use it in a React app, that's the syntax that you would use. They know that they need to have an index.js file, and that import from React, that's just a shorthand for that. If I want to do it with my own files, I need to give a path to that. So that could be /, that could be /source /. It just needs to be some path. It needs to start with something other than a letter, basically.
All right.
Cool. We're running a little bit long, but I'll do one more question. What's on your mind?
This is a quick one, but
Yeah.
if you are going in the same directory that you're in, do you need the // or can you just type in traffic light?
So that's the trick of it. I am in the same directory here. It has to be // because if I do this, it's going to look for a node module called traffic light, and it's going to try to import its index.js file.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
So we only do that for the React library, right?
Or any other NPM module. So like
Okay.
if I installed Lodash, npm install Lodash. So I've got Lodash now. It's my favorite JavaScript utility library. So handy. I want to use it in this app. Then I import underscore from Lodash, like that.
And the underscore is just because that's what Lodash has. It's I don't know what you want to call it, file name or whatever.
No, that could be anything I want. I can call that fart. I can call it Lodash. I can call it whatever. By convention, it's popular to represent it with an underscore. And that gives me the entire library. Like Lodash has their own implementation of map that works on objects, for example. So I can do underscore.map and use their version of map if I want. Because that underscore has the entire library on it.
So is underscore like a variable that represents all the shit that you imported?
In this case, yes. Since I'm taking the default export from Lodash, I get all of its shit as an object just hanging off of that underscore. Now I can also do named exports. Nope, I don't want the entire Lodash library. I just want map. So I'll take their named export for map and pull that in.
And so now we'd be able to use underscore map like in the Lodash syntax, just like normal, even though we didn't specify the underscore.
No, now I have a map just available in my scope that I can use.
Okay.
And so I would do something like this. Whatever your mapping function is, and then whatever the data is.
Okay, so then map gets replaced by the Lodash map.
Not quite, because if you'll remember how we use map in JavaScript, it goes directly off of the object, or the arrays and stuff, right? So I would do something like dot map. So that array prototype owns dot map. And the Lodash one, I can use them side by side. But I would do something like that with the built-in map, and I would do something like this with the Lodash map.
Okay, gotcha.
Good question. Cool. And then Zach asked about jQuery in chat. jQuery is dead. There's there's no reason to use jQuery in 2020. But the reason it's dead is because it won. Everything that used to be a part of jQuery is just a part of browsers now. Like, we didn't used to have fetch. We used to have $.ajax from jQuery. We don't need $.ajax anymore because we have fetch. jQuery was also like made in an era where every browser was crazy fucking different. And so what one browser would support would be completely different from what another browser would support. So you'd write it in jQuery, and jQuery would handle all the browser differences for you.
Okay. I was probably watching an old video. I'd watched a YouTube video about rendering comments to a page optimistically and pessimistically.
Yep.
Seemed like what I was, doing in Mod 3, and the guy that did it was using a bunch of JavaScript that I barely understood, and it was all jQuery. I feel like, but
not needed anymore. We used to not have query selector. Query selector came from jQuery. We just stripped jQuery for parts. It became part of our life, so we don't need it anymore.
Okay.
Cool. All right, Jesse's doing some live coding right now. We can so I'm sure somebody's told you this so far. Mod 4 is 3 ideas, but they're really heady, kind of complicated ones. So we just spend 3 weeks talking about the same 3 things over and over again. So this isn't the last time we're going to talk about state and props, but hopefully the picture's a little bit more clear to you now. Awesome. Thank you much.
Thanks, Kyle.
Yep.
Yeah, I feel like I state well. I feel like props is still a little edgy, but I'll review a video.
Cool.
Thank you.
Cheers.